Welcome to It's Later Than You Think, the podcast about living in the moment, enjoying the ride, and making the most out of our lives. I'm your host, Patrick Ailshire, a 40-something-year-old Wisconsinite, sharing my experiences and encouraging you to rethink time, purpose, and everything in between. Let's make the most of right now. Hey, how we doing today? Hope you were able to enjoy an extended weekend, which was dovetailed with Memorial Day the other day. Always great to be thankful and remember our troops who risked their lives to defend our country here in the good old US of A. We are quickly approaching a quarter of a century, a quarter of 100 episodes, and It's Later Than You Think podcast. And we've got a special one planned out today and also in the coming weeks, where we're going to look back at some of the interviews that I have had with our very special guests and going to play some clips, give you a little recap about some of the topics that have been brought up. And hopefully these will be a good refresher for you to remember that it is later than you think. And you'll hopefully be able to get a fresh perspective on life and the experiences of my guests. I hope you enjoy the look back. This first clip is from a conversation I had with Marie Schneider, who is the owner, operator, and photographer for Wild Elegance. This conversation was very entertaining. We went through a handful of topics, took some side quests, as Marie liked to say. But this first clip discusses the neurodevelopmental disorder, ADHD, and what life is like for someone who lives with this.
It's a really interesting concept. And, sometimes, especially with social media, I get a little frustrated because it makes ADHD funny, which it is funny. I mean, if you don't laugh at yourself, what's the point? But there's also the embarrassing side of it. So I started a job and it's in the office and it's with professionals. And I feel like I'm a 12-year-old kid. I'm saying things impulsively and that I'm embarrassed about it, or I can't sit still in a meeting. If you put me in a meeting for more than an hour, I'm a small child who needs a snack and water and activity break. So it's interesting. And that's kind of where the coaching comes from, is I try as much as possible not to medicate for my ADHD. I take Adderall. I'm not ashamed of that at all, but I take it strictly when I need to. And that means when I need to means when I want to not feel embarrassed or disturb other people. So I'm fine. If I'm left to my own devices, I get everything done. It's not in a logical order. It looks chaotic from the outside in, but just working with women specifically, because it does, we mask it a little bit differently than a lot of men do, and just how that looks and how it shows up as adults and the anxiety and the stress and all of that goes along with it. It's really, it would have been great to have more research on it as I was growing up. I still think it's funny. I ran into one of our teachers from high school and I was like, yeah, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And they go, no shit. I was like, oh, okay, thanks. But when we were in school, unless it was an extreme case, it wasn't an issue. I just was allowed to go on adventures and take things down to the office to get myself up and out because we had great teachers and they just understood that's what I needed.
This next clip was from a conversation I had with my cousin James, who lives out in the greatest city in the world, New York City, Manhattan, to be exact. James was another quite long-winded guest, as Marie was, and that's nothing negative. I thoroughly enjoyed both of these conversations, and what I was excited to talk to James about, not only his writing career, but just what life has been like for him going between a few different cities from the Midwest to out east. And I love New York, and so it was great to chat with him about him moving there and some of what he really enjoys about being in the city. Then I recall you moved to Iowa City for work and lived in a pretty cool place.
It's called the Gaslight Village. And Kurt Vonnegut famously lived in the room below me, and he's considered one of the greatest genre American writers of all time, just one of the best American writers of all time. And then, then I moved to, New York City, and I'd never been somebody who was like, one day I'm going to go to the big city and come true. Like when I first came to New York, I was making fun of my sister for moving here. And I was like, why would you want to move to New York? It's dirty. It's a shithole. Like it's crowded. I'd never even been. And I actually came to New York, my very first full day in New York City. And I never get tired of telling the story. But my very first full day in New York City was St. Patrick's Day, 2022. By the end of the day, I was like, I got to move here. This is the greatest city. And now I've been here longer than I actually ever thought I would. And I think that is the coolest thing that I've enjoyed so far about moving to all these different places is what you discover, what you find when you're there, and the stuff that you never imagined like you could do or what would happen to you. It's not like I don't spend all my time in New York at super, super fancy, awesome clubs or restaurants. Like I've gone to like one or two, but, and in Whitewater, it wasn't like I was like plowing the fields, and in, Milwaukee, it wasn't like I was like, doing, I want to say like stealing car radios or whatever.
Yeah.
but it's like getting to actually learn about these places and meet all these different people and like, literally, not to sound too corny, but like all the adventures you get to go on, like your life really does become an odyssey. And what I think is really interesting is like, fun fact, the Odyssey, like Homer's epic poem, like one of the founding texts of Western, not just mythology, but thought, art. The Odyssey, like we think of it as an adventure, and it is, but really what the Odyssey is the story of a man who is trying to get home. And then ends up going to all these different places accidentally. And what people, I mentioned the hero's journey, and it's something I reference consistently. One of the most important parts of the hero's journey, in fact, half of the hero's journey, half of it is setting out on the adventure and then getting to the place that you're supposed to be. The other half is what's called the return. That's the back part of like, if it's a circle, it's the back half of the circle. And it's debatably the most important part.
The third and final guest I will be featuring on this week's episode is from my very first interview. Jake Miller, local Milwaukee rock star musician, friend of mine, and I was really happy that he came on to share his experiences of what life is like as a musician. This first clip is about a very funny story that Jake tells about something wild or crazy that he's experienced on stage in his whole career. And so he did share a very entertaining clip. What's the craziest thing you've seen happen during a concert that you've been playing?
Oh, boy.
Thing at least that sticks out in your mind that's like, oh, God, I got to tell someone about that later.
Well, I was playing in Pewaukee on the beach. This was years ago, and it was a really windy day. And we were playing on stage during halfway through a song, and I noticed this little old lady in a wheelchair on the sidewalk.
Okay.
And she's kind of by herself. I think she had family nearby, but she's sitting and enjoying the music. And I'm like, oh, that's really sweet. And the wind picked up and started pushing her on her chair towards the street. And, we're all playing and nobody's noticing this. And this little old lady is like helpless in the wind. Eventually hits the curb and takes a spill. And I'm trying my best to communicate with the other guys, like, hey, can you see this? And I'm nodding and I'm, pointing my head over.
Oh, man.
So an ambulance had to come, and you can't stop the show. So, the show must go on, as they say.
Yeah.
And so we're just watching all this happen, and she ended up okay, I think. But
good.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. A windy day for an old lady in a wheelchair. Oh, man.
Well, you guys must have been playing really well, because I'm sure whoever had pushed her down there initially was probably up dancing around. Having a good time.
Yeah, everyone's just clueless to this sweet little lady getting blown around.
For this next clip, we go back to James, who tells us about his experience as a writer, specifically writing for a very well-known YouTube channel. I was very fascinated by this question, his response, and this topic overall. So I'd love to say that I know a lot of writers in my life, but I really don't. And just knowing James, as him being a family member, and him over the years, just seeing him get into something that he was really passionate about and that he's good at, it was really cool to hear him get this opportunity and explain what it is like being in the world of a writer, specifically a YouTube channel. Enjoy. What has, or perhaps was, if it's not currently a thing, your experience like writing for a YouTube channel?
Yeah. So that was really fun. That was something I only got to do. I've done this actually a couple times in my career. One of the first freelance jobs I ever had was writing for like a YouTube channel where I was doing like top 10 video game, like comedy videos almost. I was okay at it, but those videos make me cringe now. And you can definitely tell, because I only did it for a summer and like 3 months, and you can tell like I slowly start to lose my mind and any interest in the project, like as the videos progress. There is one of those videos I made with my friends that I'm like a little proud of, which is like a live sketch that we all like kind of worked on together. But the other job that I had was actually last year, and for a few months as well. And that, like, because of that job, I became richer than I ever have before, which meant I had $2,000 in my bank account. So,
Hey.
So I was like, yeah, just call me Warren Buffett. Yeah, awesome, super fun. I really do like working for YouTube channels. The one that I worked with initially was a little bit difficult because I was actually working for some people in like Pakistan. Like Pakistan has a huge presence on the internet, especially in kind of the fringes of like top 10 video creation or like list style, like journalism. Like they actually do. There's a lot of people from Pakistan who do that. Web development too. But so that one was okay. But there was a bit of like a language and a cultural barrier occasionally. And they wanted me producing like a video a day, which is like a pretty insane schedule because I had to do like all the research, all the writing, all the editing, all that stuff. And that is exhausting. And I didn't realize what that meant. So it was a good job for me to realize, like, to get some confidence and be like, oh, practice on how to do it and get a paycheck for it. But yeah, that one got frustrating as it went on. The second one I worked for was, still watch them. They're a great channel, the Y-Files. Super, super fun people, like mystery, history, conspiracy style, YouTube videos, like between 30, 40 minutes and like an hour. We'll do videos on like Bigfoot, like the CIA and ghosts and all this stuff, like ancient history. Super fun. I wrote like probably 5 or 6 scripts for them. I mean, the experience with that was a little more professional. It's kind of like what you'd expect from like a writer's room. So we would have a call every Friday, and I would meet with the head of the show, the producer, and then a group of like 5 to 6 other freelance writers who are working in this kind of room. And you just answer any questions and you get feedback, and, you kind of get to talk with people and hear what people are working on. People can pitch ideas. That's a little bit closer to, from what I understand. I've never worked in TV, but from what I know about writers' rooms, like that's really how they work, is you get a bunch of people together and, fun fact, like for instance, in the golden age of The Simpsons, the way the writers' room worked was everybody comes together to pitch ideas and jokes, and then they slowly build a story together, and then one person takes the script, writes the full script for the episode, then comes back to the room and people get feedback on it, tear it apart, and rebuild it. And, after that process goes back and forth. And then you have a finished network television script. The way that the Y-Files worked was a little bit different, where because their production schedule is much quicker than your average network television show, network TV, for a season of network TV, you're basically like, it's kind of like a year on, year off type of thing, where it takes like a year or two to produce like a full, season of television, and then you air it, you air the season for a year, and then you're making preparations for the next season, blah, blah, blah. With the Y-Files or any other YouTube show, it's a constant production because you're trying as much as possible to stay relevant to the algorithm and to keep your audience engaged. So they're putting out a video that's like an hour, sometimes usually an hour long, like every week, which is an insane production schedule. So their biggest goal is get as much material as possible and make sure it's the way we need it, and get it up, in the various stages of production, so we can make sure that we have a backlog of videos that are ready, because we don't ever want to be in the position where it's like we have a week where we're supposed to have a video and we don't. So your job as like a writer in that is just like, they give you a script and they're like, can you turn this around to us in 2 weeks? And you're like, sure. You do all the research, write the first draft, you send it over to the producer, and they give you some notes. Then you write usually a second draft. And unlike network TV, you don't have a whole lot of time to go back and forth, especially if you're starting out as a new writer. So you want to kind of make sure that you're doing like your best work basically every draft. And it was really, really fun. Like it was a great experience. Like it was really, I would say, my first professional writing job. What I will say is it really taught me that a lot of jobs that you take as a writer, you need to get a lot of experience before you really get some of those jobs that you want. And that sounds obvious. What I mean by that, I'm sure you've experienced this in your career. They cannot tell you how to write a good story. Like, you need to know how to do that. That is something like in the same way that a professional athlete knows how to play a good game. And the only way they know how to do that is by playing thousands of games, hundreds of games at least, over and over again, and practicing too. You got to be able to do that with your writing.
This next clip features Jake discussing communication while up on stage, as well as the vulnerability of being a musician and being okay with the learning and growing and making mistakes, which comes with the territory. I found this very cool as well, specifically since in my role as a facilitator, I do discuss effective communication fairly regularly. And I like to see how this could be taken from the classroom out to the stage, if you will. Now, I want to switch gears to when you are up on stage. As far as communication goes, I imagine there's a lot more that goes into it than what the person out in the crowd sees and imagines. What is that like? And do you find that's different between bands that you work with, or is it all kind of the same as far as that goes with timing and things like that?
I think there's a base communication with, first of all, the song structure and learning the songs and having rehearsals. Every good band should rehearse and practice together.
Yeah.
And then I think it's important to hang out beyond that as well. So just everyone has a different personality, and everyone has their own body language. And when you're on stage, it definitely is to your advantage to know facial expressions of somebody, because there's subtle cues that you watch for. And after you play with somebody long enough time, you kind of you start to learn to see those without thinking about it. And it becomes extremely intimate. So it's really hard to describe because I don't think there's anything quite like it. I feel like it's an extremely intimate communication. They say music is the universal language, and that's true. And going band to band to band, there is a universal sort of vulnerability. So you're basically relying on everybody else to come together and complete a puzzle. And that vulnerability, makes you very humble for starters, because you have to do your part to not make a mistake. And then you're also trying to cover somebody else if they make a mistake. And it's a trust. It's a very big trust to perform with other people on stage.
You made some good points there. I love that analogy of the puzzle, getting all those pieces together. And sometimes it's going to be a little more difficult. Maybe there's more puzzles or pieces in this puzzle, or it's not a complete, border, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging. But I think that's a great way to put it. The last clip I will share, we're going to go back to Marie talking about inspirational books that have left a lasting impact.
I really pushed when I was teaching to add the book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which I don't know if you read that in high school. It is a great book, but it deals with sexual assault. It deals with drug use. It deals with issues that my students, who a lot of them were considered, in that at-risk category. I'm always like, at risk of what? Having independent thought, cool. But they were actually talking. But as a teacher, when you walk in after a chapter where the kid does LSD and trips out in a bad way, and you walk in and you start your class and you're like, okay, this is why we don't do drugs. And, they start laughing. Yeah. Obviously it's meant as a joke. Don't do those drugs, but you start the class that way to get their attention. And then I'm like, we read that book. At least I exhausted the English curriculum. I'm a good reader. when I was in high school. And that was one of the most meaningful books I think I read as a um, and, we read like The Great Gatsby, but when I read The Great Gatsby now as an adult, it's more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know how we got on this side quest. Sorry. We're going to take a few of those today.
I love it. This is what the podcast is all about, right?
Conversation. That's what it is.
Exactly. If you enjoyed hearing the snippets from those 3 interviews, feel free to take a look back at the full interviews, which are available on all the podcast platforms. The Fleeting Moment series is the series where I meet and chat with my guests. Windy Days, watching John Mulaney watch fish and getting 1% better every day. It was episode 7 featuring Jake. The Fleeting Moment series, Kaleidoscopic Vision, Serial Killers, and Side Quests with Marie Schneider was episode 8. And the Fleeting Moment series, The World of a Writer, Enjoying Your Surroundings, and the mythical ADHD was episode 10, and that was with Jane. I hope everyone has a great last week of May. Look forward to chatting with you next time.